Hey,
How you doing? Good to see you.
good to see you too.
Oh, good to see you again.
Yeah.
Well, come on in, have a seat right here.
Sign
You guys
in,
wanna
please.
on the,
Sign in.
Guest list for the minutes. Make yourself comfortable. Bathrooms are just outside here. We do have a water bubbler if you guys need. Water.
Thank you.
Linda, success?
Keys?
Success.
All right.
It was the hanging on the wheel.
Yeah,
It did it.
okay. If it's over, if you've turned in and you haven't straightened it back out, it makes it hard to get it turned anymore.
I did turn in.
Yeah. So
All
that the
right.
wheel wasn't straight.
Anybody else need
Did you bring me in?
minutes, agendas, or rules of procedure?
Yeah.
Okay.
Was.
Yeah. No Phil, and no Eric yet.
Well, it's 6:31. Oh,
Recording is going, so you can.
okay, well,
Wait a minute.
for the moment, I am no longer the chairperson because my term expired. So, I think actually,
These go up.
Rob, you should call the meeting to order and then, elect the
Chair.
chairperson, and then the chairperson can take it from there.
All right. I will, as the administrator,
Oh,
temporarily,
here's Eric.
I will call the meeting to order. It is 6:32. It is the 10th of May, 2023. We are gathered in the Public Works Facility at the town of Enfield, 74 Lock Haven Road. And we are going to start the meeting with a election of officers. And appropriately, we will start with the chair so that we can have a person to run the meeting. So at this point, I would like to accept nominations for the position of chair.
I nominate Dave Frack for chair.
Second, third, fourth.
All right, so that's one nomination. Any other nominations?
Nobody closed
nobody's that great.
nominations.
Okay, the nominations are closed. All those in favor, we have nobody on virtually, so I don't think we have to do a roll call.
Nope.
So all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? David? Congratulations.
I guess I'm just going crazy here.
Yes,
We don't need to do a roll call, but we will do introductions. So, board members from my left, starting with Linda.
Linda Jones.
Eric Hustle. Dan Kiley. David Frack.
Brad Rich.
would you like a better chair?
Carcott Hutch. And
Oh, Whitney Banker.
Rob Taylor, our
yes,
administrator.
Trying to get it.
I'm gonna grab Linda better chair.
Let's see, I guess as chair, I can ask Kurt to become a voting member because Phil is not with us
Okay.
today for unknown reasons. So at this point, Kurt, you can vote. And I will accept nominations for vice chair.
I nominate Dan Kelly.
I'll second that. Are there any other nominations? I declare nominations closed. All in favor of Dan Kiley for vice chair, indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstention?
I'll abstain.
The vote is 6-4, no nays and 1 abstention. Congratulations, Dan. You're welcome. We often usually elect a secretary who is responsible for making sure that Whitney does her job.
Can we nominate Phil in his absence?
Sure.
I nominate Phil.
Okay, Phil has been nominated and seconded. Are there any other nominations?
I would like to, look at our maps up there. I would like to submit that I would enjoy doing that job. Just,
Would somebody like to nominate Mr. Tim Jennings?
Nominate Tim Jones.
I'll second that.
All right, for the first time ever, we have a contested election. Someone's actually bought it, too. Okay. Are there any other nominations? I declare nominations closed. All in favor of Tim Jennings for secretary indicate, no, raise your hands.
So,
What, did we already vote on Phil?
No,
No, he's gonna
we,
be next.
we're gonna vote on Tim first. And then Phil second, unless people want to do it by a secret ballot. In which case, Rob will hand out little pieces of paper and you write whoever you want to write. Do you guys want to do a secret ballot?
No.
Okay. So again, all in favor of Tim Jennings, indicate by raising your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think Tim got it.
Congratulations.
Congratulations,
Tim didn't
Tim.
vote, so are you a
well, I
nay
still
or an
need to,
abstention?
Abstain.
You can vote for yourself.
Do you have any second thoughts that maybe you don't know everything the job entails?
Apparently it doesn't require much. 'cause
Right.
We're gonna rewrite the job description tonight, so.
I'll be doing the right.
Oh, I was ready to do this, I was wondering about that.
Okay. So. We are, public comments. Sealy, anything you want to talk about that's not on the agenda?
Not now.
Not now.
Bring something up.
Okay. Eric, you want to give the select board report?
Sure, so just a couple of updates on some things. So the Whitney Hall project, the RFP was awarded to Breville, which was the group that did the initial contractual stuff, so that is starting to move forward. So for Lakeside Park, we're running, they're gonna start having rentals where you can rent the pavilion. Be very similar to the community building, in terms of how it works, but they're just sort of finalizing the details of that, but that's gonna be happening. We have, so many people might be interested, we've adopted a new town logo, so we'll still have the town seal, but there's also a town logo for various publications and documents and stuff. And then the big discussion at the last meeting was around community nursing. A group has been sort of, putting together some plans and proposals for community nursing. There will be a public hearing, I believe, I'm not sure if it's posted yet, but at the next not the next meeting, but at the June 5th select board meeting, there'll be a public hearing on that. So I would encourage everybody to attend that. It's an interesting concept. It's several towns in the Upper Valley have sort of moved in that direction, and there's a proposal for Enfield to start taking steps in that direction as well. So that should be an interesting discussion. And other than that, sort of business as usual. Yes.
Is there any discussion on the, short-term rental ordinance?
No. No, there has not been any discussion on that. We've been doing there's a few ordinances that we have to review on a certain time frame, and so we've been doing those. There is a plan to go through more of our sort of ordinances and rules through town, but we have not discussed a short-term ordinance.
It would be advantageous to get that done before the summer months, because that's where all the mess happens, all the rentals.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Rob, can you highlight what's gone on in the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, just a couple of quick things. I did have a really neat meeting today. I was invited down by Vanessa Stone to come talk to her realtor. She has, I think, almost 10 agents that work for her. So I went down to their office and had a nice lively roundtable discussion with them. Brought them up to speed on the new ADU. They're relatively familiar with what we had done, and they're very excited because it's certainly something that they're talking about with their clients and anybody that's coming in to look at land and developing and buying and so forth in town. We talked about other things as well, and it was very productive, and I was very happy to go down there, and they seem to be excited about prospects in Enfield. So their big problem right now is very low inventory. We're down something in the vicinity of 1,000 units of housing for sale in New Hampshire,
Oh, really?
which is crazy. So there's sort of a desperation for housing, for them as business people and just for, as we've talked about, for people, we need housing, so. We're doing some work on some zoning enforcement. We've got a few things that are active. You mentioned the Grafton Pond Road property. Was up on High Street today, talking to a property owner there. Got something going on Shaker Boulevard. If you guys see anything out there that you're concerned about, I think we're just, in the future, the next few months, it'll be another push for junk cars. We've done some auditing, ridden around town, trying to locate places that have more than one unregistered vehicle, which, as you know, sort of puts you into the junkyard category. So, I mean, that's just kind of a constant, any town I've ever been in.
Yeah.
We've worked on them in Plainfield for years, and same here, my brother's long history. But if you have anything specific, let me know. It's fairly busy. Building permits, as I said last time, continue to be very busy. Liam is very active. Lots of solar happening in town. And, this is the building season, so really things are ramping up. We got a few single family homes being built, including one right on Depot. Probably saw the foundation going down there. So times are good. It's a good time in Enfield. Things are very busy. Public Works is very busy. The sewer water project up on Maple Street is now really ramped up. That was a big to do just to get it started. And that was a little bit of stress here, but we've got through that and moving forward. So anything, contact me, specifics.
On the, in the previous meetings, you talked about the ADUs and also and the people coming in and talking to you and,
Yep.
and I guess Ian, about them. Do they indicate what their plan is, for the use of the ADU at all? Is that coming into discussion?
I think it's mostly family. The ADU is absolutely, and I think that's gonna be a trend in the next 15, 20 years. I mean, for the last 50 years, we've sort of moved away from living with family.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of backfired on us, from a culture standpoint. And so I think we're starting to sort of see a drift backwards. ADU is a great place for mom, she's elderly. We can keep an eye on her. She can be right here, has her own space, even an adult kid, how are they gonna afford a place in this economy? They got their own living
Because-
quarters right there.
I was just wondering. I'm sure a lot has to do with location, but how many would be actually with the intent of, just due to the cost of constructing them?
Yep.
The intent is to be a short-term rental for the payback.
Yeah.
Type.
I think there will be some of that, particularly on the lakefront.
Yeah, that's what I was
That's a
thinking,
smart time.
location wise.
Yep.
Location would definitely be.
Yep.
A place where you could charge those rates.
Yep. And previous to us changing our ordinance, we've seen a lot of the uptake for ADUs on the waterfronts, as you know, especially for, redeveloping space that might not have been used.
Yeah.
So, yep. The one thing I was talking about with Vanessa Stone, out west, there's actually companies that have popped up that are doing the financing. So like, we'll build an ADU at your house, our cost. And you sign an agreement for like 10 years, we get the rent. At the end of the 10 years, you own it. So it sort of brings the barriers down, and it's happening out west. It hasn't happened here yet, but it might. Absolutely. So
Okay, anything else, Rob?
that's all I got.
All right, we do have, John Hafner as a guest, and if nobody objects, I would like to ask John to give his presentation
John's
and,
got a colleague with him.
and his colleague, I'm sorry.
I'm just here to hang out, yeah.
Come on,
Okay,
John.
and then we'll come back
The expensive seats up here.
to the minutes
All right.
at the end. John is with Vital Communities. You're the transportation coordinator.
One of them, yeah, myself and Ellen are the housing and transportation program managers there at Vital Communities. And Rob participates in our Upper Valley Transportation Management Association, and Ed, your town manager, sits in on the municipal leaders group that Vital Communities convenes, as well as is a part of Leadership Upper Valley, which is another group that Vital Communities convenes here in the Upper Valley. And it was actually, I'm in this year's class of Leadership Upper Valley with Ed, and part of one of our days was a Transportation and Livable Communities Day that was featured, and did a walking tour around West Lebanon and gave a presentation around sort of land use planning and the different changes that have happened over the years around how different communities are approaching land use planning, and how it's shifted particularly in the last 50 years towards a very car-centric approach to getting around in the Upper Valley. And so Ed really enjoyed kind of me providing some context around what it is that sort of historic context of transportation, and as well as housing and land use planning in the Upper Valley, and thought it'd be good to if I came here and just had a chat with you guys. And obviously it's great to get to meet folks that are on planning boards and communities that are really involved in the trenches of their communities and figuring out and setting the stages of what you want to see happen here in Enfield. And so really it's a privilege for me to be here and get to learn a little bit more about what you're doing and see if there's ways to connect to other things that are going on in the Upper Valley. So that's the reason why I'm here, on the behest of your town manager. So if you're not happy with what I have to say, take it up. But so I'll just go a little bit into, folks may be familiar with Vital Communities, but I'll just give you a little bit of what it is that we do. Our mission is to engage Upper Valley people, organizations, and communities to create equitable solutions to our region's challenges. And we're now approaching, I think, our 30th year of existence here in the Upper Valley. And throughout those 30 years, we've served 69 towns in both Vermont and New Hampshire on both sides of the river. And our programming currently includes work around climate, early childhood education, local economy, energy, food and farm, leadership, and then what Ellen and I work on, housing and transportation. One of those things that I mentioned that Rob sits on is the Upper Valley Transportation Management Association. And this is a group that we convene, and it's representatives from employers, municipalities, school districts, regional planners, and transit providers that aim to improve transportation options and to work towards a safe, reliable, and multimodal transportation system. So trying to encourage not just single occupancy vehicle travel, but biking, walking, public transit, and through this provide safe ways of getting around, convenient ways of getting around, as well as minimize climate impact here in the Upper Valley. So I kind of want to shift away from talking about what we do, because I'm kind of here more interested, because I've been fanboying a little bit of what Enfield's been doing lately. There's been some really exciting stuff that the town has been working on. Just going to rattle off a few of your greatest hits here recently. The 2 ADU ordinance that was passed, reducing minimum lot sizes, getting the Scenic Byway grant that was just announced to provide a multi-use path around 4A. Rob mentioned you're interested in looking into parking minimums, maybe even parking maximums. And then I know that you are working on getting a housing opportunity planning grant from New Hampshire Housing to do a major rehaul of your zoning. So it really is, I think, there's networks that we convene, there's conversations that we're a part of. And I think that there's a lot that the town can learn from participating in what's going on in the rest of the region. But I also think that there's a lot of other towns within the region that can really benefit from the work that Enfield has been doing and the work that you've been doing on the planning board. And I was thinking about as a, been following the things that Enfield has been doing. I don't know if anybody is familiar with an organization called Strong Towns. They're an advocacy organization and focusing on sort of a number of campaign areas, but primarily they're wanting to shift the development patterns that have been happening, kind of since the post-war era of the 1950s that led to the suburban experiment, and thinking about ways of making towns more livable, safer, and more sustainable. And they have 5 campaign areas, and the 3 of them, incremental housing development, safe and productive streets, and ending parking mandates and subsidies, are areas that it seems as though already Enfield is working on. And recently they run a competition. It's called the Strongest Town USA. Brattleboro just got it for this year. But as I was kind of preparing and looking into the stuff that you've been working on, I was like, well, this kind of seems like this could be an Enfield situation maybe next year. So start to maybe add a little competition here. But I think that it just shows that, you know, I don't know, I imagine that this has been a part of larger discussions that have been happening over several years and lots of different iterations of the planning board and municipal staff being involved. But I think it's just a testament to that there's an alignment that Enfield has with some larger movements that are going on, not just in our region, but around the country to sort of really change the way that our built environment operates, the way that it serves the people within municipalities, and I think shifts land use planning in a different direction. And I think that that's something that's just, you know, and this was sort of what the you know, when I had given this presentation for Leadership Upper Valley that Ed was a part of, and I'll just kind of go through this just quickly, is that, you know, there's oftentimes the sense of, well, because things have happened a certain way for a significant amount of time, there's this assumption that that's the way that they've always been and that's the way they always will be, particularly when things get down in writing and they get in, you know, situations of zoning bylaws and ordinances and, you know, get embedded into planning documents. And these cycles are so long, they're decades and decades of the momentum building that you think like, okay, well, this is just the way that things go, and what control do we have over this as just everyday citizens? But I think what's important to remember is that, you know, this is then why I think Strong Towns is an interesting organization to look at, because they really focus on this idea that you can shift paradigms through incremental changes that can really, you know, set yourself up for a different kind of community and a different kind of success within your community. And I trying to think of a way of articulating, you know, how this can happen in Enfield, or how to demonstrate that, you know, housing, for example, and transportation have not always been the way that they have been for the last 60, 70 years. And I stumbled upon a book that was by an architectural critic named Michael J. Lewis, and it's called Cities of Refuge. And it was a study of utopian town planning from the Shaker's perspective. And it actually referenced the Great Stone Dwelling and the Shaker Village here in Enfield. And I think it was really interesting because in it, he was talking about how the different separatist religious communities were trying to set up utopian communities here on earth through different approaches. And obviously there was the spiritual component, but there was also architectural forms and different ways of daily life that were experienced through active planning. And I always like to look back on historical ways of planning, because it shows you that, you know, planning is obviously a profession that Rob does and is trained for and executes through, you know, a town structure, and other towns have it, and there's regional planning, but their planning is actually just an abiding concern for the future. It's a universal human experience that, you know, you don't have to be, you know, you don't have to have necessarily a license to think that you want to be concerned about what it is that your town is doing and opinions that you have of the direction that the future is lies for your town. And I think looking back at how Shaker Village historically had been planned and thought through by just community members, people who didn't have a planning degree or you know, weren't a paid professional staff, but were just community members that cared about their community. And there is some kind of, I think, layers that are still relevant to what's going on here in Enfield today. And Rob, you had just mentioned the, you know, maybe the going back to the trend of multi-generational living and sharing housing with intergenerationally and with family members. You know, that was one of the main components of the design of Shaker Village. Its architectural form was to be functionally for sharing communal spaces with, you know, not always just family, but within a community. It was that idea of generating fellowship through these buildings and structures. And another thing that it also, I think, was referenced in this book that I think is resonance to contemporary understandings and explorations of planning is that they shared an architectural style. And you can obviously see that through looking at Shaker Village. You can tell that it shares a particular characteristic and style to it. And this is something that communities are starting to employ through something called form-based code, which I don't know if that's something you've been discussing here at all in this, but other communities that are taking up, Lebanon's kind of been exploring it as well. But, you know, we kind of have these technical names for it within planning, contemporary planning as a technical profession, but it's something that has been done, you know, throughout history, and is something can been done particularly in this area within the Shakers history and presence here. So I think it's a thing that I like to, when I'm talking about, housing and transportation in particular, is these problems can feel really intractable and like they never change, and that there's this resistance or this, assumption that the way that things are the way that they have been and the way that they will continue to be or have to be. But I think that the built environment is full of these different layers upon layers of what land use decisions used to be. And if we want to have, communities that are more livable, walkable, bikeable, affordable housing, mixed use, all of these things, that they are things that are really quite possible. And we just have to look to our own kind of recent history to see that happen. And I'm just really encouraged to see, Enfield as a town really taking up a lot of different experiments and trying different things. And I think that there's ways that, like I said, the rest of the region can learn from what it is that you're doing here. So I that's mostly kind of what I'm, just wanting to connect with you here to learn a little bit more about what it is that you're doing and to share kind of the things that and conversations that we've been having elsewhere with other communities. I think I'll happy to answer any questions about what it is that we do at Vital Communities, and particularly the work that Ellen and I do. I think that there's a couple upcoming events that be interesting to flag for folks here if they want to participate in. I'm happy to share, experiences of the work, but I mostly just wanted to introduce myself and connect with the work that you're doing.
You had mentioned the greatest hits earlier about Enfield.
Yeah.
I would throw out that one of them is we just recently adopted a brand new master plan at the end of December. You should check out. Because there are
Leaping
chapters.
forward.
You got it.
Yeah, I got it. I was
So,
looking at it.
housing and transportation chapters, and those were,
Mhm.
we did 5 chapters to start out with, and we certainly started with what we felt were the most pressing and important. And we've got a plan for 5 more,
Mhm.
which we're really excited about, and that should be starting up in the next month or two to continue that effort. And I think it's a sign of how well we're doing. I'm happy to hear you saying all that stuff. It's kind of puffs us up a little bit here in Enfield, but one of the things that I think would be really cool that Vital Communities could maybe help us sort of get the rest of the Upper Valley to sort of, there should be like a master plan for the Upper Valley, right? I mean, and maybe that you guys convening that or something that might help we need to think as a region a little bit more. I think, we tend to be kind of fractured. Every little town is its own little silo, as we used to say. And that's a problem for a lot of things. I mean, for developers, everybody's got to learn a different set of rules in every town, and makes it hard, A lot of developers are like, well, I don't want to have to go to that town and learn a whole new system. Just stay in this town and keep working. But so, I don't know, that's something that I think Vital Communities could continue to play a very important role as sort of helping us think regionally, even across the river. I mean, it is a different state, but it's a part of our community. We definitely think we identify as an Upper Valley, it's definitely a cohesion there, but just a couple of my thoughts.
Yeah.
Yep.
I have a question for you, John, as you were rattling off things. One of the phrases you said was ending parking mandates, and I tell me what that means.
So that is, for
That-
a lot of zoning, and then this isn't just here, but also, there's different, state level, local level bylaws that mandate that a certain number of parking spaces need to be made available for a development. And what that has sort of been shown historically is that that creates a disproportionate amount of parking per people. And it's sort of then creates a situation where you're adding parking where there doesn't need to be parking. And then when you add that parking, then you're creating a singular land use, a singular use for that particular area. Whereas if it could be used for other developments like housing or like business development or bike lane or sidewalk. So some communities have, Burlington recently did this where they actually created parking maximums, like a development only has a certain amount of parking spots that they are able to add. So they're limited to the parking that they can add. And
What's the thinking behind that?
the thinking is that there's too much land has been designated towards parking.
Yeah.
And especially if you're in the middle of a housing crisis,
Right.
then there's, only so much developable land. You want to be able to prioritize that land for other uses.
Yeah.
That's not parking. And it also creates, frustrations for people who are adding, developers. So like if you're, for example, trying to build an affordable housing complex where it's mostly efficiency or 1-bedroom apartments, there are sometimes, I think, parking mandates that require 2 spots per unit. And so you're creating more parking spots than you are actual livable units.
Right.
So it's one of those things that it's a mandate that then doesn't actually, provide for flexibility dependent on the context of where the development is. Doug Shoup is a guy who's a professor out of LA who's looked at a lot of sort of the rise of parking in America. And it's sort of, I don't know what the exact number is, but there's, an obscene amount of parking spots per person in
Yeah,
the country.
the large mall is a great example of that, where, the mall is full once a year.
Yeah, it's based on Black Friday.
Black Friday, and that's it.
And that's what they do. That's how they make those decisions. They go on the busiest day of shopping year, and then all those spots are just sitting empty.
Yeah.
And another one is, the churches are similar, where there's, one day of the week they're full, and then they're pretty much empty the rest of the week. And so it's not necessarily saying, not to tell people like, oh, you don't have a parking problem, or you just need to figure out it, but it's more that there's enough parking that is available. It's just a matter of using it efficiently, and that you sort of hamstring yourself if you create mandates that a new development needs to have a certain number of parking spots in order to go up, because then it just chews up available land.
As well as an effect on impervious surfaces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Has
And the water
stormwater,
runoff
yeah.
becomes an issue with oil mixed into the water runoff.
Yeah. And it's also one of those things that, if you look at historically how, communities used to look, that you have main streets where the houses were right up against the road, and it had, traffic calming measures. People didn't drive as fast. You could walk safely along the streets. And this is what we see in like places like West Lebanon, where all of a sudden it's just turned into just, chaos, and you would never imagine you wanted to walk around in that area. And, parking creates a more of a car-centric environment. And so I think the things that you're doing here in Enfield of trying to create safer conditions for walking and biking, that's, I applaud that.
West Lebanon is not walkable.
No, yeah.
It's not. It's not, there are not sidewalks even.
Juxtapose it
that you
with a
could.
city like Keene.
Right,
Walk down Main Street Keene, it's like, wow.
right.
Even Concord now.
Concord's got
Oh,
all
fantastic.
Yeah.
Where the mall has left and the downtown is revitalized.
Yeah.
And then both of those have reduced the parking
Oh, yeah.
and improved the quality of life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I grew up in Keene, and I remember
Right.
going down there
Oh,
growing
yeah.
up, and it was just,
Yeah.
you didn't go there.
You did? No. The same with Concord. I grew up in Concord. Concord's Main Street died when Steeplegate went in, and 20 years later, Steeplegate's dead. Steeplegate's dead,
It's empty.
and downtown is full.
Yeah.
and yet there's less parking than there was 20 years ago, but you can get parking spaces better today than you could 20 years ago.
Is that because of the public transportation that has been
Some of
provided?
it's the public transportation, some of it is they did a better job of setting up the parking itself.
Yeah. I think what he said about West Lebanon, you drive down West Lebanon, it's all these giant parking lots.
Yeah.
Right into these businesses that are in the back, so to speak.
Right.
Whereas if you go to Keene or Concord, the businesses are on the street and you can kind of,
And,
the parking's in the back.
and it's ugly.
Well,
Right.
and,
West
The
Lebanon,
parking
yeah.
lot.
and if you use the Walmart, thing there where, yeah, on Black Friday, Walmart's parking lot is full, but Price Chopper and the rest of them are not.
Yeah.
So they obviously have more had more parking space than they actually needed.
Yeah.
But because of the regulations, each of those had to have X number of parking spaces. Even though, you know, I mean, Aspen Dental needs 3, but because of the square footage, they probably were told you've gotta have 20.
Yeah.
So we've actually, kind of kicked around some of these thoughts in relation to some, site plans that have come before us. And I don't know that we've solved the problem, but correct me if I'm wrong, board members, please, but I think we are toying with the idea of leaving parking to be solved by market forces, by the developers, the landowners. And, I don't know how unique that is in the world. Just a second, Ed. Do you know of any other towns that are just saying,
No, but I wanted to follow it up.
okay, okay, Ed. Go ahead, Ed.
Oh, I just wanted to say, that's part of the reason I talked to Rob about bringing John here. He did a wonderful job giving us a presentation last month in Leadership Upper Valley. I knew you guys had talked about that and just kind of wanted to have that conversation. If we haven't shared the videos with you, there's 2 videos that kind of go along. The guy from LA he was talking about that shows some overviews of cities with all you see is parking. You don't even really see the buildings. And I just really wanted to get those thoughts flowing in here as we start looking at zoning of, we make these rules and do we really know what the end consequence
Well,
is?
the rules were made with the best of intentions, huh?
Yeah,
Of course
But
they
a
were.
lot of them have backfired.
If you look at, and I can buy some books if people want to read them, but, Strong Towns comes out with some really good stuff talking about, these massive parking lots that bring absolutely no tax revenue.
Yeah.
And then we build this little bitty building, and then a big parking lot and little bitty building. And so I just really wanted to get some creative thought, if you will. I actually told Jonathan last year, I'd almost rather bring confusion than education to this session, just getting people thinking a little bit as we move into this zoning talk to really start to dig into what does Enfield need. And so I thank Jonathan for coming. Sorry I was a little bit late, but
Yeah.
I think the last time we discussed parking, we seem to be headed towards, as you say, David, commercial establishments having that be left up to market forces. Still, we're hung up on housing parking. Having 1 or 2 cars, per housing unit. Seems reasonable. But, we really had, that's where we're kind of, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Still.
yeah.
I have my opinions on retail commercial versus residential commercial. Apartment complex. It could be not a single family home, it's a commercial enterprise, but it's residential aspect of it. And because most people around here, it's really hard to live without at least 1 vehicle. And most households have at least 2, married or kids, that are driving. So, I grew up in Boston, I didn't have to own a car there if I didn't want to. There was plenty of public transportation 24/7. but that's not here.
That's
I
not,
mean, it's limited. It's here, but it's limited.
And I've read a lot of the articles from Strong Town parking. If any of you haven't, they're really good, but you know, they don't really apply specifically to a small village setting like we're in. They do in a kind of a generic way, but, I mean, we've got 7, I counted them, we got 7 on-street parking spaces between the post office and the lake. That's down Main Street, the entire length of the street. So you realize that there isn't any other opportunity for people to park in an apartment building really, other than on the lot where the apartment building is. And somehow they make do. Cause I don't think the 7 on-street parking spaces are being competed for, certainly not in the winter because you can't park there anyway overnight.
Mhm.
So, we don't really have a parking problem that I'm aware of. And we don't, so again, it just falls into that residential side of things. You know, where do we go with that in our zoning ordinance? So we don't want to get into weeds on that tonight, but I think that's where we need some help.
Yeah, and I think that there's a range of options available, you know, it's not every community is built the same. And so therefore, not every zoning ordinance is going to fit the same community. I think it's sort of more to just kind of Ed's point of it gets you thinking differently about how decisions have backfired historically and how there may be archaic rules that are still reinforcing those same kind of practices. However, that, you know, plays out in Enfield is different from how it might play out somewhere else. But, you know, I think that the thing about the parking minimums is that, you know, you might set a parking minimum that you can only mandate, at, you know, sort of, most one, spot per unit. That doesn't mean, sorry, it's basically saying you can add more, but you don't have to.
Yeah.
Is basically what it's saying.
Right.
So, that's kind of the idea.
and that's what we were talking about with
Yeah.
market forces, that
Yeah.
if it's an apartment building that doesn't have a lot of parking and people know that, they're not gonna rent there if they can't park their car or if there's not a way to do it. So you let the developer worry about it, and that frees them up to be creative and try to fit as much housing in as they can.
Mhm.
Police off-site parking,
Yeah,
excess.
You, deal with sidewalks and, you know, sort of like looking at, say like the town of Enfield and sort of work with the Rob there about where sidewalks could go, should go, things like that. Is that part of your, fall into your category, or is that?
I mean, I think that,
Somewhat deep into the weeds and.
I mean, and for each individual community, it's obviously in the weeds, and it's like, I would defer to community members and to Rob and the folks who work in the town to really know those things. But I think that those are, part of the conversations that we want to convene, where towns can share these experiences of, you know, and many towns will have a bike ped committee, that, you know, is advocating for particular investments in specific parts of the built environment in each town. And, you know, a lot of times these are like-minded folks who are sharing and part of larger conversations that are going on. And so I think that those are the types of things that, you know, we like to be supportive of it. And, the work that we do is, you know, say there's projects that you're working on, bike ped projects, you know, and that maybe it would benefit to have a, you know, input or connecting to other communities that are doing similar stuff. But certainly being involved in the conversation is something that we're
And this
interested
probably
in.
wouldn't come up in terms of us promoting a bike path or anything. It would come up in what we should include in the ordinance if we want to do anything along the lines of more modern thinking about a development and, okay, what does bicycles and pedestrian need to be and.
Well, the sidewalks is a huge issue. Eric and I, when we were working on the master plan, I don't think, other than taxes, I don't think there was an issue that was mentioned more
Right.
when we did our surveys than sidewalks.
Right.
And of course, they're expensive and then you have to
Right.
maintain them and all that sort of stuff. And there's a lot of places in town where it won't fit, the
Yeah.
sidewalk won't fit, but it's a huge
Yeah.
problem in this town.
Yeah.
And I'm sure others.
I mean, those are the kinds of things that for other communities, we've helped to go after grant funding, write letters of support, get other, organized support
Yeah,
behind
those-
it and things like that. So those are the kinds of, I mean, and that's how unfortunately a lot of these sidewalks get built and stuff. I don't know if that's how you've had to do it in the past, but just it's like, there's a lot of sidewalk grants that you have
All
to.
of
go
ours
after.
got built because of the 3 bridges that got replaced in town and they were able to add them
Right.
to the scope of work.
Which those are nice sidewalks. I mean, the sidewalks you do have here.
Yeah, but they end.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and then you gotta go the other side and, yeah.
I can never get that one out. You assist with grants around writing? Is that something?
Yeah, we'd be happy to, we've done like letters of support and things like that before and, happy to help research for other grants that would be available.
Is that something that's, I mean, we're all volunteers and Rob, I don't know his background on grant writing and all this.
Rob's not busy. He's got
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, he's got- yeah.
I mean, I know, I saw in the plan, you wanna start to
Yeah,
advocate for a
yeah,
complete.
That's like,
Yeah.
help with
complete
grant,
street.
please.
You're looking at complete streets.
That was one of the things in the master plan.
Yeah,
What's that?
I saw that, yeah, in the master plan, you had a complete streets.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Or even Burlington, the Great Streets, I think is what they called it, but yeah, we really need to take advantage of that,
Yeah,
going forward.
and I think that now is the time to do it too. And it's hard because, there's so much federal money that's going into it, but it's a hard kind of landscape to navigate,
Yeah,
to figure out.
it's horribly.
You need a grants writer.
Yeah,
That's another thing I think would be useful.
but
to
as we
share
change the
resources.
zoning regulations, rules and all that sort of stuff, we need to keep in mind everything that we learned from the master planning process. And sidewalks is just one example where we need to take that into account
Yeah.
when we're trying to fix the zoning.
Yeah, cause sometimes, the sidewalk and the speed of traffic issue, is compounded because of adhering to engineering criteria that's.
Right.
Or, it's decades old and it's meant for faster traffic than what you really want and so forth. And this is an example in Cardigan Mountain School, a small boarding school campus in Canaan. Town road goes right through and we ended up building a building rather near the road. And over the course of that construction, the road actually got a little bit narrower. And it was amazing how, and this road goes right through the middle of our campus. It's 25-mile-an-hour zone, but people tend to go really fast.
Students.
It was amazing how many people came up to me and says, that road has gotten so narrow. I have to drive so slow.
Yeah.
That's the idea.
That's the reason why you narrowed it.
That's psychological.
It is, right? Yeah.
So that's a good lead into, I wanted to just ask essentially the same question, but in a slightly different way of, are there investments that have been shown to decrease the need for parking or or car trips? Because, there's some that are obviously sidewalks, but are the good crosswalks the investment that actually take out the barrier to people making the decision to do it? Like Hanover right now in the summer, right, they're intentionally narrowing Main Street on purpose to have the exact impact that he's talking about, right? There's studies where simply striping a road more narrowly will reduce the speed people are traveling at. Are there investments that have been shown to reduce the need for, say, parking?
I mean, I think that it's one of those things that it's tricky because you're going to be a car dependent, community if you basically make it unenjoyable to walk or use other modes of getting around. And so if you're a car dependent community, then you're going to have a need for parking. So I think it's a bit of a staged process in terms of you implement these things, you create a situation in which it's actually enjoyable to walk around. And then you don't have a sense of like, well, I need to have a parking
Yeah.
spot exactly where I need to have it because that's the only way I know to get around. But if, you figure out how to basically create a situation where you want to walk
I
somewhere.
guess what I'm getting is there's probably like a few bottlenecks where we could prioritize, because we're not gonna do everything all at once. But you don't wanna build a really expensive street that then dead ends into the most busy intersection in town, and nobody will cross that intersection, so nobody will then use your big expensive street.
And a way to do
You know,
that,
As an example, so however to prioritize and think about the bottlenecks to actually making people use them, right, allows for a staged approach.
and the way to
is what I'm
kind
getting
of practice that
Yeah.
is to do something like it's called a pop-up project.
Mhm.
I don't know if you've followed these things, but they're just kind of,
Mhm.
they're pop-up or demonstration projects, they're called, where you can basically create the
Mhm.
conditions that you would want to try out
Mhm.
and see how that kind of responds. And so you might want to do something where you use some cones or chalk to create a bump out on a curb so that it sort of restricts the flow of traffic or takes away parking and see what kind of
That's what
situation. it
Burlington,
is.
you was mentioning Burlington. I went up to Burlington. They put these gigantic planters.
Yeah.
Lebanon's doing it too.
Yeah.
I've seen it, Right, gigantic planters, almost in the middle of the street. I mean, they're literally, you gotta kind of, like you were saying, you gotta slow down and go around
Right.
these planters. They love them. They're beautiful. They're exploding with flowers. And they can move them in the winter so they can plow, but it's kind of, it's been a big success. And that's what they call them grade streets. So it's not just biking, walking cars, but they have like artwork.
Mhm.
They want greenery, they want shade. Those kind of things that really do make,
AARP has a great guide for doing stuff like this for these demonstration projects. And I think they've got some grant programs to implement some of these kinds of changes as well to help fund some of the pop-up demonstration work. And they're also a great way to kind of mobilize and get the community involved in it and start to think about, oh, wow, we could do something different here, So, but yeah, I think to your point, there are a number of bottlenecks. You don't really, and these are huge investments that you need to make. Infrastructure is really expensive. And so how do you kind of make sure that you're making the right investments? And so these kinds of pop-up projects can be a good way of doing that.
A topic that I'm very interested in is, and I'll introduce this, just making a comment about you're bringing historical Shaker Village impact on the community over there. I'm not sure that's the kind of planning we're looking for, utopia where they control the minds and thoughts of the people and, these are the colors we're gonna use and no one can object, et cetera, et cetera. That's a little too far down that path. I think a better anecdote of why we like our town is because it developed organically without zoning for 150 years. And what we have that we appreciate today was not really, I don't think it was really gone through a lot of planning, it just happened. And we're lucky in that regard. So I don't want to see the town lose that feel. And at the same time, we need much more dense housing down in the village. What I liked about what you mentioned was, and I forget the phrase you used, but it talks about the appearance of the building. What's the phrase?
Form-based code.
So we have an ADU ordinance and Patterson's on the back. This is all good. But I believe at present, it leaves us open to just about anything being slid on a lot to represent an ADU. And while we want to encourage that, we also don't want to cause harm to the adjacent property owners in terms of their property values because of what might be thrown in there as an ADU. So we debated at some point in the past about aesthetic standards, and we kind of realized that was a complicated subject. It's, maybe been tried in Plainfield, didn't work all that well. I'm interested in what is the current thinking on that and what does work. You know, what can you do to kind of see the development buildings, that new buildings fit the neighborhoods well, architecturally look good, and yet not introduce an unnecessary cost to the person building the structure.
And other places that have kind of explored ADUs in particular, there have set designs that can sort of, there's incentives to choosing them. These are kind of larger, these are more larger communities who have tended to do this, like Seattle has a whole ADU project that they have a number of different sort of already approved site plans and things like that.
We
that
want to keep it
directly,
simple.
yeah. So I think that there's maybe a range of things that can be done with that regard, and it's an area of experimentation that I'm still not as familiar with. I know that Lebanon is looking into some pattern zoning, it's another name for form-based code that basically kind of sets particular conditions, and if you meet those conditions, then you're basically your permit is fast tracked because it fits in with what has already been pre-approved effectively. And so I think that there's things like that that can incentivize a particular aesthetic and style.
Well, I think that's one of the things that we need to consider as we move forward for zoning, maybe form-based or whatever we're calling it. I think that maybe we don't do it. Maybe as a group, we decide, no, that's too much infringement, but I think that we should look at it.
I mean, do you know, it's kind of one of those things that with ADU ordinances, there have been rising in popularity, but obviously there are other barriers to ADU construction, a lot of that being the actual cost of construction, the financing of it, the availability of labor, all of that stuff. And so have you seen a lot of ADUs kind of being built here, or is that still?
A lot of interest.
A lot of interest, yeah. And,
Yeah, we've been adding them at a fairly steady stream in the last, since I've been here. I mean, they're definitely going in, not gangbusters,
Mhm.
but I think you're absolutely hitting the nail on the head. It's definitely a cost. I mean, a real ADU in your house could be $100,000.
Yeah.
I mean,
More than that.
Easy.
oh, yeah, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Depends on, what you got for space to begin with. I mean, if it's finished space that you're just converting to an ADU.
And if it's attached, it really can get expensive.
Yeah.
Very fast.
Okay,
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I like the thought process. Even though we like set setbacks, like this is what you can do, that you can't do. To me, a lot of times zoning seems to be written, I say almost like the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not do this, and you can't do this, and you can't do that. And I like kind of the incentive approach of this is what we want, and if you do that, we are gonna make it really easy to develop. It almost incentivizes people to do what you want them to do and not say, we're not gonna let you do this.
I'd have to be persuaded of that. I'm not there with you on that.
Well, it may
We'll
be,
work
that
on
may
it.
be, that may be an easier path than trying to do, ground up form-based zoning. That's the point, right? Is, to your point, we don't want, aluminum structures slid off a truck, in a neighborhood. But at the same time, if you get into the detail of form-based construction and look and architecture, that's complex.
Yeah.
Whereas
Agreed.
if you give the carrot, where, hey, these are 10 designs, blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying it's right, but I'm saying that it might be a faster path to getting what we want.
Well, I think the incentives can get just as complex as any of the rest of the approaches. Somewhere there's a sweet spot where we have a decent set of guidelines that are simple to understand, simple to administer. And we get what we get.
I think providing examples, and you don't have to have it, written as this is what you have to do, but it's just more of an education and awareness building, is there's, tons of examples of ADU programs in a number of different communities where you can actually just show people what they look like or what they could.
Tiny
be.
house concept.
Yeah, yeah, you're showing, just kind of demonstrating conceptually, this is what it could look like, and that is a way of, I think, softly kind of steering people into like, you know. Cause I think they obviously still have to adhere to building codes.
Sure.
Water, sewer, things like that.
Setback.
And so there is a level of requirements that it can't just be a shoddy construction that shows up. And I think that the way to incentivize good construction is to show examples of it. And there's, you know, great developers out there that are building some really cool things. It's just sometimes the cost can be prohibitive to that.
So, the pre-approved site plans also help just in terms of the affordability factor. So folks who are maybe more middle income who struggle to afford building one, if there's a pre-approved plan, you're gonna cut architecture costs, you're gonna cut the timeline to get through permitting. So it can just make it more accessible for more households to do ADUs as well.
I have a big broad question. Different topic, related though. So Keys of the Upper Valley study, I think it was 10,000 housing units we need in the Upper Valley. And then the recent study that is at the state level, 60,000, 90,000.
90,000, yeah.
Period of time, okay, big numbers. Is there a way to suggest to Enfield, this is the number, your share of that?
I think the master plan did that based on the Keys to the Valley study.
And what was the number?
Off the top of my head, I'm gonna guess. No, I'm not even gonna guess, cause I
I
could.
thought it was 1,300.
That's as good a number as any,
I could be wrong.
but there, you know, if you go into the mass, oh, I know where I've got that number.
So I think you can look it up.
Well,
Yeah.
I question the raw data, how they came up with that number.
Well,
Far as, you know, for the Upper Valley or for the statewide, how that numbers, because when I look at previous older housing study reports, and I have like 3 or 4 of them that I found that go back 20, 30 years. And they all say the same thing, we need more housing. So for the last 40 years, they always say we need more housing. There's never enough housing. And the rents are so high, the rates, the cost of a house is too high for the person who wants to buy it. The rents are too high for the renter, and it never changes.
the number is 200
Yeah,
by 2030.
page 47.
We'll give you
And then
here's an example, though. Look at Mount Support Road in Lebanon. 250 units go up. And as soon as, before they're up, they're full.
Yeah,
So another 250, just go up Mount Support. If you haven't been up Mount Support in the last 2 years, you're gonna see there's about 1,000 more units than there were 2 years ago. And there's 300, and there's 300 more going up right now.
And they've been blasting an
And they-
awful lot of ledge to
Right.
do it.
And they're packing that in. And that's because Hitchcock has still got 1,000 employee need. And people don't want to be driving from Plymouth and Grafton and Exeter to work there.
Mhm.
And that's what's happening today, is people are driving 50 and 60 miles because they can't get housing here.
Which is the exact opposite of what you want to have happen, right?
Exactly, you're
Exactly.
putting more cars on the road.
Well, Kirk brings up a good point, and that is that, if we're gonna propose a new zoning ordinance that's going to increase density more than we already can
Mhm.
allow, because we did have a couple of amendments recently that help. You know, we gotta sell that, but people gotta vote on this. We have a zoning ordinance that's more permissive.
Well, the whole zoning, rewrite is gonna be huge involvement with
Yeah.
the public. Huge.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And maybe you push to multi-use buildings
Well, the point is.
where you've
that-
got, yeah.
that- correct me if I'm wrong here, but as I understand it, you don't, you question the numbers and question the cause and effect that if we build that many houses, that our housing problem will go away. And, or that we even have a housing problem. A lot of people don't even think we have a housing problem. And,
That's because they have a house.
yeah, so.
That's because they already live here.
Yeah, I mean, the point that Dan
Right.
makes about people having to drive an hour and a half, 2 hours to get to work at some of our major employers, that's been a known fact for
Yeah.
many years.
Right.
And that's held back the growth of some of our larger employers in the Upper Valley. It certainly has put a crimp in the Hitchcock operation as far as healthcare goes. You know, people don't want to drive 2 hours to work an 8-hour or 12-hour shift, and then drive 2 hours to get home, because what kind of life is that?
So, all those arguments, and, you know, I think if we went around the table, we'd have slightly different interpretations, and you certainly have one that's different from mine. But, we wonder, you know, to what point are we preaching to the choir here?
Right.
Mhm.
I think most of us, maybe except you, Kurt, feel like we need to build more housing. Lots of reasons why, and it would be good, I guess, just to put on our salesman's hat when the time comes, to be able to articulate, this is why we're proposing this.
That's part of the process.
Now, somehow or another, that quarter acre zoning went through town meeting without a blip, not a question one, nothing. Not a
Everything went through without a
listserv,
blip.
Right.
comment.
Yeah.
Just boom.
So one thing that I think, so I agree with you, I think part of why people like Enfield Village is the way it grew up. One of the big ironies is you could not build Enfield Village with our current
That's
zoning.
right.
But I think that's one of the big, if you look at like what are the traditional New England settlement patterns that we all like, our zoning doesn't allow it, but people like it.
Mhm.
So we want to, like, that's one of the big arguments for why you would do a sort of a wholesale zoning rewrite, is so that we could build what we like.
And
But we have to have zoning that,
Right.
that
And to
reflects
attract
what's
small
on the
business.
ground and has been here for
Right.
the last 150 years or so.
Correct, and I was, one other just little, part of what's driving the need for new housing is the decline in household size.
Right.
So we've gone from having, 4 people per household to like 1.7.
4.7 to 1.7.
Right, okay, that was, so even with the same number of people, you now need more than twice as many units. Not necessarily square footage of units, but total units, just by virtue of people are living in smaller households.
And take short-term rentals, which is a pressure on the housing market.
Yeah.
So if we have enough housing that's, turned into short-term rentals, at some point,
Mhm.
we will satisfy that market. And people will realize, I can't do a short-term rental because there's too many of them out there right now, and there's only so many people we can rent to. So you gotta satisfy that market. You gotta satisfy the market for vacation homes. At some point, the fact that the vacation homes are all around the lake, no one wants the vacation home on May Street where I live. Right? That's workforce housing area.
Right.
So I think that's another reason why a large housing inventory satisfies all these needs. And you even have homes that are run down because the owner doesn't want to put the money into them and so forth. Well, those are affordable rents for somebody.
Right.
And they're important. Right. So, yeah, maybe we're just preaching to the choir here.
Right, because we do have a form-based zone already, which is the Route 4 zone.
Right.
That is form-based. Which,
Yeah, which,
but we can't sell it. It's like, can you sell a form-based multi-use where you've got
retail on the bottom and apartments on top. I mean, that's an ideal setup. It's also an ideal setup for a developer or a landowner at this point who could say, hey, wait a minute, I can get enough rent off the second floor to pay my mortgage, as well as the retail on the first floor.
But Dan, since the Route 4 district was
Nothing's
created,
happened.
exactly,
Nothing's
except
happened.
for the dollar store.
Family Dollar. Yes,
And,
Why didn't that fit the?
well,
but, you know, nothing has happened. Perhaps because nothing was for sale. And it's a no.
I've heard many stories of businesses that were coming in and left because of that.
Because of the
I
form
can't
base.
give you facts, but I can hear
because of,
builders and people that owned it said, you know, Hannaford was coming, this one was coming, but they didn't want to build the way we said we had to build. So it's just something to think about. I can't prove those facts, but I've heard many stories from many people that they were talking to
I mean,
developers.
I can see national chains, they have their cookie cutter pattern. This is what we build, cause it's,
Right.
we already pre-designed it, it's the cheapest for us. Can't do this, we're walking, we're not
Well,
going.
and it's also what works to bring customers.
right,
No, it's, customers go there because they wanna go there. They don't care what the building looks like. If you wanna shop there, you don't shop there because you like the building.
I'll disagree with you.
Well,
If it's easy to get in and out of, they
Well,
wanna go.
that's different,
That's-
that's
that's-
different, that's different.
that is an issue, yeah.
But it also comes back to every lot is owned by a private person. And if they're not interested in doing anything with their lot, it sits there. Just like that house that burned, it's still sitting there. And it should have let it burn to the ground, would have been better. You know, and those other houses that sort of abandoned. Been along Route 4.
Yes.
It's like, they've been like that ever since the last 50 years. Nothing changed. The owner hasn't changed either, so.
Eventually, the owner's gonna pass on and
Right,
the
right,
ownership
right.
will change.
Right, yeah.
And I think the kinds of things that we're talking about or should be talking about are, A, they're incremental and the increments are small. And, you know, we have to think in generational terms, really, rather than in terms of, well, let's see how many houses we can get by 2030.
Right.
You know, we may get our 200 units, we may get 600, we may get 10.
And I do think that that's something that people who have maybe focused on the numbers before, and I can, you know, speak as anecdotally, just the Keys to the Valley folks that we've worked with and folks in New Hampshire Housing who are part of the statewide housing needs assessment. There's this kind of, like, is that really, are these, talking about these numbers, is that really effective or useful? And I think at a certain point in the conversation, it was to start to bring attention to the, you know, the fact that they're, to kind of put a number to what the housing crisis is. But also, you know, especially in the case of Keys to the Valley, that study was done pre-COVID.
Right.
And it's a moving target then too. And I think to the point of that there's available space, there's available buildings, that there's this mismatch between the housing need and the housing that exists. And so how do you basically convert these spaces into that are
Well,
more
I think that's
usable?
what the
Yeah.
towns need help with, right?
Yeah,
I think it was a
right.
good start, you know,
Mhm.
Keys to the Valley, but I think the devil is in the details. How do you do it?
And the number 10,000 is so big that you say, I can't affect it.
How do you attract developers to come in and build where they can make their investment profitable? At the same time, not going crazy in the town, you know, you want slow continued growth in a town, not down or not up, right?
Yeah.
So it's tough.
Yeah.
It's a tough nut.
And we're gonna be changing the zoning to try to encourage that, but be careful what you ask for, right? The people before us in the last generation did the very best they could with the zoning, and a lot of it
People need it, right?
is not what we want today. And so be careful what you do. You gotta be really careful.
Well, I'll make a comment. I'm just curious what your all's thoughts are. if none of the Upper Valley towns had ever implemented zoning, I suggest we probably would not have a housing crisis right now. We would have other crises.
Would have a different crisis.
Well,
You're right.
I
Probably
disagree with
not a
that
housing
because-
crisis. I think
Right.
the market would have met the demand as
Oh, see,
it changed over the years.
But Canaan and
See-
Grafton don't have zoning.
yeah, no, that's my
And
point too,
Dorchester.
But
that.
they're not able to address the housing crisis in Hanover or Lebanon.
Sure they
Too
can.
far
The,
away.
the commute's not that.
No.
I worked with
No,
many, you know, I've worked
no.
with plenty of people at Hitchcock that lived in Canaan and lived in Grafton. The commute's only another 15 minutes, depending on what part of town you're coming from. Once you get to Route 4, it's whatever Route 4 traffic is doing, no matter where you start. And it's just, they're not building there.
Well, clearly Canaan and Grafton.
Yeah.
Are meeting the demands that the markets put on those communities for those
Right.
folks that wanna live out in
Yeah.
the rural areas.
Mhm.
The towns that are closer to Hanover or Hanover and Lebanon are not meeting the demands of the community there. And they would if they could,
So there's a
or
lot,
they would have if they
Right.
could over the past 50
yeah,
years.
so another thing that I have is with Lebanon, they have, I forget how many hundreds of approved but unbuilt units.
Yeah.
On their, when you go to the planning, their webpage, they have on their planning zoning section, they have a little Excel spreadsheet showing how many houses approved, built, unbuilt.
And why is that cost?
No, Part,
I
part
don't
of,
know.
no, part
I can't- I don't
part of
know.
that is sewer
So
capacity.
capacity,
So once you get your
Right.
units approved,
right,
you are,
you hold it,
you hold that sewer capacity.
Yeah, but
at-
they're not being
No.
built. These are unbuilt,
But,
approved but
but the reason
unbuilt.
they're putting in plans is because if you wanna have a plan for 500 units, you need to have access to 500 units worth of sewer.
right,
If you're competing with 10 other developers
right.
for 5,000 units worth of
Get yours in first.
sewer,
You
you
can,
put your plan in, even if you don't think you're gonna build it, you put your plan in
Right.
so that you have the option. 'Cause
Right,
if you
'cause-
don't,
Yeah,
you don't even have the option to build.
right, you can sell your capacity.
Maybe that's what they're doing.
So, but I think,
Yeah.
I think you are generally
You're
correct.
generally correct, yeah.
That without any zoning in Hanover, Lebanon, there would be significantly more housing in those communities.
no, that's not what I'm proposing.
No,
No, no,
No, no.
no,
But your
No,
analysis.
no,
is right.
I'm saying that I
Right.
think you're correct. Zoning has limited
Right.
housing development
Oh, yeah.
within the Upper Valley.
And it's certainly easier to build in Canaan and Grafton. I mean,
Yeah, but I mean, there's a lot of reasons why.
I think you
People wanna be,
hit,
you
that's
know.
what I was gonna say
Yeah.
is the services to provide the sewer, the
Right,
water,
right,
those things are not in those places.
Right, yeah.
right,
And they're not gonna support
Right.
bigger growth because of that.
that is how the zoning is written also. You can't build on anything less than 5 acres in line, basically. You can't. It will not get approved.
Parts of Hanover are on Rudsboro Road, and it's in
Right.
forestry district. So one house per 50 acres.
oh, no
I
kidding.
know,
And that's closer to Hanover and to the
Right.
exit 17 than my house.
Well, and there's, parts up, like past my house, Maple Street goes up
Right.
into Canaan and then,
it's in
and you,
Hanover.
and they've zoned that, so you
Right.
can't build no new lots, basically no
Right.
year-round construction. So there's been a lot of different approaches to
Oh, yeah.
different areas.
I worked for a company, we had 90 acres in Hanover, we went in, we wanted to do 15 houses, and they said, no, you can do one though. Because it was out on Mulherring.
Yep.
Right out in the zone, it says it's an R5, but you're gonna come in on a class 6 road, we're only gonna approve one. Well, can I go on Mulherring? Well, no, because that makes a loop and you can't build behind the loop. But that's how it
List
is.
of things that you guys could take action on.
All of this.
You have a word list?
Well,
Some of the value in looking at some of those other things though,
Right,
like when I ride my bike up past my house through Canaan and Hanover, it's absolutely beautiful because you
Right.
can't build anything. It's a beautiful
Right.
country road. Right, and so if that's what you want, it's worked.
yeah,
Yeah, and
Well,
you
This
know,
isn't a
that,
judgment saying what has happened in these
Right.
places. It's a statement of like, there's a zone like this and this is what happened.
Right.
Right, but in
And we can
Hanover's
learn from it.
case, it was because they couldn't get the services to service those areas, emergency services from Hanover to those areas. You had to go through Enfield, Canaan, and everywhere else to get there. So from their perspective, it made sense.
Right. But there,
Are they rethinking
correct, I'm
that?
not trying to cast a judgment on
No.
the way they
Yeah,
did it,
I'm
I'm
just saying
simply saying,
That's it, what it is.
when you do, when you, just as we've seen in Enfield, when you zone a certain way, you get certain results. And we can learn from all of those as we think through the different parts of our town.
Right, I mean, like Methodist Hill Road on the other side of 89. You know, sure, Lebanon will show up first, but it's still an Enfield house.
Right.
Mhm.
So still have to show up.
And no matter how well you write and you think you're doing, something else can also happen.
Mhm.
It's proven every time you do it. You know, you figured this was gonna be what happened, and something else is gonna happen. And it may not be what you wanted to happen, but like you said, you did the best you could at the time.
And you learn from. your
Exactly.
errors.
We learned from Family Dollar
You learn a lot of
that the
things.
windows have to be real windows. They can't be fake windows. But it wasn't in there that it had to be a real window.
Well, they're real glass
Oh, yeah, but
They are.
with the
but
insulation.
the building's
right?
also right behind the building's behind the real glass.
Want to beat up on the dollar store, but.
Well,
Why not?
So you drive to Bristol.
Yeah.
And as you're coming into Bristol from this direction. Is that 104?
Yeah.
There's a dollar store there, and it's a really handsome building. What did they do?
It is
different?
not.
We did not require anything.
right, it's real handsome, it's also closed. Yeah,
And that could be they spent too much money on the building
Right.
and went belly up. I don't know, but.
no, But
But
Family Dollar
I've
had,
seen those stores.
Yeah.
And really nice looking.
Oh, yeah.
buildings That you'd love to have in your town,
right,
and yet we didn't get that.
no,
What could we do, that maybe that.
Well, that comes back to the form.
We learned from our experience. And, next time around, when we redo our zoning, I'd like to pick up on a concept that I learned about from Concord, in which they specify, and there's a technical term, I don't remember it, but basically they specify the maximum amount of opacity in a window that faces the street. And that way you don't get the blank wall window like we have.
Well, and when it goes beyond just the dollar store and the window, when Jake's came in for a proposal, they submitted some architectural drawings that were just completely opposite of what they built. They had peaked roof, New England style architecture when they came in for conceptual. And everybody looked at it and said, oh, that looks great, that's wonderful. Then they came in for their actual proposal and they showed us what they built.
Well, it's a matter of opinion there.
And the regs,
I've kind of grown into that.
and the regs was like, well,
It's not a bad looking building.
I got no problem with that building.
no, I'm just
They
saying
could have
that.
done a lot worse.
They could have done a lot
Well,
worse.
I know, I'm just saying that unless it's,
Petromart.
unless it's there saying you have to do this.
Right.
There's no reason why,
Yeah,
well,
But
you can't
that's-
force them to do it.
But the other side of that, anything that comes to conceptual
Right,
is conceptual.
Right, I know, yeah, but it was just a bit misleading.
Yeah.
Enfield has in place a historic district.
With no zoning regs.
That's right. It
Yeah.
is in place.
Right, it's in place.
And if we choose to have any design standards, we have the mechanism of doing it.
For those three buildings.
What three
No,
buildings?
we're talking
no, we're
downtown,
not, we're talking the
Main Street.
downtown area, not the one that we just created.
Oh,
And any older buildings. But we could have design standards also. We just don't.
right,
So
Mhm.
I think we should add that to the table for throw it into the soup and give it a good stir.
No reason to not do that.
John, I wanted to ask you, are you familiar with let me get the name of it, the Center for, I think it was Restoring Historic Greenfield, Mass. and the village plans? Quite a while ago, there was someone who came to Enfield and gave a presentation.
Randall Arndt.
Yes, Randall Arndt. And, I don't want to say how long ago this was, because it might make us look old, see that. Don't put that down. But it was how they, propagated the village plan. And it's very interesting. You'll find, just Google it. You'll
Randall
find-
aren't, so is it restoring the Greenfield Village plan? Is that what you said?
I said Deerfield.
Deerfield. It was Deerfield.
Okay.
Yeah.
Deerfield.
Story.
Okay.
Historic
Yes,
Deerfield,
historic
Massachusetts.
Okay,
Deerfield,
okay.
Massachusetts. And the town was very concerned about, the character of the town being changed a lot. And so they wrote up a plan and he was very involved. Randall Arndt, was very involved in it and he wrote up this presentation that he gave on request. And, it's something that I think that your group should know about.
Good now, thank you.
Put his name in the search.
Anybody have anything
You're right, it
else
was a few years ago,
they want to talk
Yeah.
about?
more than 5.
We should let these people go.
Yeah.
We do have a few other things on our agenda, which we may or may not get to, but
Great.
Yeah, great, yeah.
we are gonna invite you back when we get into some of our zoning discussions.
Well, I'd love to be a part of that witness. I mean, these are
Yeah.
great. These are conversations that I love to be a part of
That,
and
you
just
know,
watch.
I have found this conversation to be enlightening and challenging, and I think, having you come back with a broader focus than just, the 7 of us here in Enfield have. I think that will be a tremendous asset in helping us explore what options are out there.
Mhm.
So I think this has been a great introduction, and Ed knows how to get a hold of you. And
Yeah. I'll
We
plug
will-
just a couple things we've got coming up. Rob and Ed, I think you guys both got an invitation to, we're doing a resident-owned community bus tour around the region. You're going?
Yep.
Yeah, New Hampshire Community Loan Fund has been integral in creating and sustaining manufactured home parks and turning them into resident-owned communities to help
Mhm.
keep it as an affordable housing option. And there's a couple of them nearby. There's Mascoma Meadows, Mascoma Valley, I think are on either side of Enfield. But neither of them are actually in Enfield though, I don't think.
Yeah,
One of them
yeah,
are.
we have
Well, the one in
What is
Enfield
it?
on Route
the one
4.
on 4A.
the one on Route 4 is the Enfield one.
It is an Enfield one, okay.
Yeah.
There's one on Rudsboro Road that's.
And there's one
residents.
that's one.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, so it's gonna be a great, they'll bring together some policy leaders, other municipal leaders and folks in planning to just do a tour of some of these parks to help. I mean, that's one of those things, talking about housing diversity, it's and what you zone yourself out of. Manufactured homes have been one of those, and, obviously there's a certain stigma that goes with it, and part of these tours are to dismantle that and show the kinds of great investments that are being made into these parks. And so that's coming up on May 24th, that we'll be able to report back on, or Rob, I'm sure will share that experience. And then on June 2nd, we have our annual housing breakfast in the Hilton in Lebanon from 7:30 to 10.
I'm excited for that one.
Sign up for that one too. So yeah, there are a couple things that are going on that we're doing, and be other places for conversation. So look for more stuff.
All right, John,
Yeah.
John and Ellen, thank you very
Thank you
much
very much.
for coming and sharing your thoughts with us. We really appreciate it.
Good to see you. Thanks so much.
See you. Take care.
Okay.
This rewrites the zoning laws are gonna be piece of cake. It'll be easy.
Sure,
No problem.
sure. Let's do the April 26th minutes next. Trust everybody has had a chance to go over them.
Mhm.
Are there any comments, corrections, questions? They're short. They're short.
I move that we accept the minutes as written.
Second,
Motion made and seconded to accept the April 26th minutes as written. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Abstain.
One
I meant to
abstention.
say yes, I'm sorry.
Okay. Minutes are accepted or approved as written. Let me jump around a little bit and I will update us on the grant application. And not on, but, you guys can see behind me, we have a whiteboard zoning map. It hasn't fallen off the wall in about 3 weeks, so I think it's there to stay.
Yeah.
We've tried a dry erase marker on it and they work very nicely and they come off easily. So when we get to, having our discussions about new zoning districts or where the current ones need to be modified, we will be able to sketch them out and erase and change and go back and forth, whatever we want to do.
Have you guys tried wet erase markers just to see out of curiosity? So you have to have like a wet cloth to get the marker off, but sometimes they're nicer if you're doing a lot of activity. To not have like your hand smudge. I don't know, I'm left-handed, so it's something I think about. To like not smudge off the work that you've done. That might be something to test and just see. how
Maybe
they
we
work.
should try that.
Yeah.
Look at that, right in the-
It's awesome.
Let's see, next, grant application, the New Hampshire Housing Opportunity Grant. Gone back and forth with them a couple of times. They have some questions. Rob and I are going to be meeting with them tomorrow afternoon on a Zoom call. Hopefully answer their questions and address their concerns. Reading between the lines of some of the emails that have gone back and forth. I think they are looking favorably at it, so. Order report after. Tomorrow. Excuse me. Next, rules of procedure. I need to get some water, so Dan, could you start off the conversation on that? And
Yeah.
we'll pick it up shortly.
okay, are these are the same ones we had last year,
I think they're as adopted.
as adopted, so are there any changes we want to see as we go through,
The meeting start time we changed.
which page 6:30?
Yeah, so that currently on page 3, it says
Yeah.
7 should be 6:30, but.
Yeah.
I have some additions I'd like to see included. And put my north and model here.
Page 3.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of us had a discussion outside of the board about when we have a major project being presented, either conceptually, well, at the conceptual stage, whether or not there should be words in the procedures manual that would direct Rob to, when certain criteria were met, to not just, make a ruling, but actually bring the proposal to the board. It might even require outside counsel to review, that sort of thing, in order to determine how the zoning ordinance was going to apply to the project. None of the particulars about site plan and various things, but, just, I don't know, did I describe that right? So pretty much.
Yeah.
And since we just had that conversation, I haven't a chance to put any words down to that effect. But I would like to reserve the opportunity to do that by the next
Give me
meeting.
an example of what you mean.
Well, yeah, let's say you had a large project, complicated project, and one that is liable to generate a great deal of controversy. That one needed to be very, very careful that the zoning ordinance was initially applied properly. The interpretations were clear and they were affirmed by the planning board and again, perhaps even legal counsel. So that you gave the developer clear and accurate information for them to then prepare their application. And I think we can run into some projects like that are beyond, are way more than what we should ask Rob to really carry on his shoulders alone, I guess is the way to put it. And so, I'd like to see us have a clause in here that says when these criteria are met, and they may be rather subjective because it's hard to nail that down exactly. But I think when the question comes up about does this fit that criteria or not, a conversation with the board chair should probably solve that.
Probably the number one question you'd be asked in a big project would be, does it have regional impact? And I think that's up to us to make that decision as to whether or not it has regional impact. That's not a legal issue.
Other guidelines surrounding that as to what constitutes?
There is.
There is as to what, it's like, you know, any large project, even be it commercial or residential.
Yeah.
Could have, I mean, if Walmart wants to come to Enfield for some strange
Distribution center.
a distribution center, that has regional impact because it has impact not only on Enfield, but it has
Yeah.
large trucking that's going to be going Route 4 to 89, which means it's going to be going through Lebanon.
Mhm.
So it's going to have regional impact, or it's going to be going the other direction through Canaan to get to 93, something like that. So there are criteria for what has regional impact, but it's up to the planning board to get that started as to getting to Upper Valley Lake Sunapee Regional Planning Commission saying this has regional impact. Also, if we decide that it does, then we also would have to notify Lebanon, whatever towns we feel it has regional impact on. But yeah, that's one of those that, yeah, we have to make that decision as a planning board. That's not a decision that would be made by the administrator, because it's a board vote.
Is that what you're thinking about, Tim?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That kind of thing?
yeah.
Sure. go ahead.
I have a couple of additions I'd like to see. One, some simple, some are more involved in that. One on page 5, order of business. After select board report adds the administrative reports. So it's in the rules there.
Yep.
And then the other simple one, and I got one third one that's a little bit more involved. On page 7, under records, section, paragraph 2, says, second line, would, in a brief description of the subject matter. There was a change in the RSA's and you now have to have a complete written decision for any application that was approved or denied. You can't just say application approved or application denied. You have to spell out why you, especially on the denials, but you have to be more precise and clear on your reasoning.
Yeah, we do that.
In the,
with the decision.
but it's,
Or I should say.
I mean, right, it just says brief description, well, it needs to be a little more than brief,
Mhm.
Right,
because that's
So a written description.
complete
a complete written, just,
is the way the RSA is written.
yeah.
Can I piggyback on that?
Yeah.
Could we also, say that that written decision, is, I'd like to, as the, I said, the board holds a hearing, takes a vote, makes a decision, chairman and the administrator write the decision, right? The thing that gets filed and all that good stuff. Copy of that needs to come back to the board so we can see it. I don't know how that's best done. Is it published in the town website? Is it?
Well, it should be in the minutes.
It's in the minutes. That's
We actually, because we haven't had any real applications for
right,
over a year now.
right.
So it would be on the town website in the minutes.
Well, not really, because the actual form that you use, the
Oh.
wording that
You
you
mean,
use.
you mean the
Oh,
What,
denial
and then
form,
we change to the applicants?
the acceptance or
Yeah.
denial that goes to the applicant,
Yeah, that's what I'm talking.
which, yeah, as long as he was the one that sent it. Because if he sends it, it becomes a quorum if he sends it to all of
Yeah.
us. But if Rob sends it,
Well, yes.
We
Right.
can share it at the meeting, the next meeting, the following meeting or something like that. Would you like to do that?
well, you're in
Yeah.
the middle of the, you could be have an appeal by then.
Yeah, but it would be appeal based off the decision, so
Okay,
I would
So,
say we can
yeah, we
share
should
it with you guys.
share it at the next
Yeah.
meeting. Or do you want to see it before it goes out?
No.
Okay,
No, I just.
Yeah, next meeting.
just
next
like to-
meeting? Yeah, okay.
What does the RSA say in terms of who has to sign the decision? Is it just the chair?
I don't know, I never looked for that.
Would you mind looking for that? Yeah, the reason I ask is because across the river in Vermont, the decision-making body, everybody has to sign it.
Really?
Yes.
You know, I've never,
No,
I know
I,
that's
I,
not that, 'cause
I know it's
yeah.
not that,
Yeah,
because we've never signed
never
one.
signed it, never been challenged, yeah.
No, we've never signed an approval or
Okay.
denial.
I mean, I'm
Yeah.
all in favor of
Yeah,
the rest of the board getting copies.
Yeah.
of it.
Then, related, I know you've got another one.
Yeah.
But related to this is, when an applicant goes to the ZBA and they get a variance, or a special exception for that matter, that decision, which now requires all the reasoning to be listed out, et cetera, right? That also, I think, should come back to the planning board as part of the package for the application.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
we've got a familiarity with
Yeah,
that.
what the actual motion was. Because, yeah, there's been times in the
What they
past
waived.
where the ZBA wrote a motion on something, and then we were verbally told something different than what they approved, and it became a problem.
Well, I didn't know that was the case, but, you know,
That was,
but
that
it
was
was
several
close to
years
the
ago.
application, it was
Yeah,
many
it was-
years ago, yeah.
But I just remember
I
that
remember
happening,
it too,
and it was
Yeah.
like a big round and circle,
right,
well,
where the variance they put in for was not the variance that was approved.
Yeah.
And it came across as though they had approved the original variance, when in fact, the zoning board had changed. Basically, the two had gotten together and said, okay, well, what about this? And they said, okay, we'll accept that. But the original application for variance is what came back to the planning board. And we were under the impression that they had approved what they had originally asked for, when
Yeah.
in fact it was something different.
Yeah, I just remember there was a big
Yeah,
snafu over.
I know it,
Well, that,
Fun times.
at times,
yeah. Okay, I'm done.
yeah.
Okay, so basically, what we're asking Rob to do is when a variance or any action of the ZBA that affects something that we're involved with, or something that we might eventually be involved with, that we get a copy of that written decision.
Sure.
And I think the ZBA has kind of, shall I say, cleaned up their act a little bit in recent years, and they are actually writing decisions, rather than just checking off boxes on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
So we should have a little bit more information that we can work with going forward, as long as the paperwork comes to us.
And I think I liked your phrase, the decisions that affect what we're doing.
Yeah,
So,
because,
Yeah.
because we don't need to know that Brad Rich got a variance for putting up a shed.
Which I
Uh,
did.
We can go on the website and look at the minutes of the
Right.
Yeah.
ZBA
How
and
much
find
cost
that out.
If it affects an application, a pending application.
or future application.
Oh, that's true.
Anybody have anything
Well,
else
I
they
got-
wanna talk about
Well, I got-
on the procedures?
Yeah, just, I sent this a while back, and I don't know if Rob, you still have. It's the sort of spelled out the breakdown of when an application is presented. I just basically spelled out a step-by-step process, and basically, the reason I did this, because in the past, it was always, when we have an application, the administrator will say, the application's complete, the chair will ask for a motion on to accept the application. Everybody says aye, stamp, and we just move right along. And there's been occasionally when I had some questions regarding the completeness of the application, but because the process just went stamp, 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 never got a chance to raise my concerns. And once that happens, the clock starts ticking for approval or denial with the application. And the issue can become a problem if something that should have been submitted up front
Yeah,
wasn't.
yeah.
And the applicant says, well, you accepted it without it,
Yeah.
so I'm not gonna do it.
The Sandpit's a good example where the map was not so great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and there's been others in the past
Yeah.
too. I mean, there's occasionally it happens. And yes, okay, you're trying to help the guy out, be nice, move things along. Everybody's always in a rush. I've heard that so many times where I have to have it done and we approve it and years go by and nothing happens. So I don't know where the rush was, but that's on their end. But what I would like to see it is that when we ask, is the application complete? You either say, yes, it's complete, or you state, well, this is the stuff that's currently missing. That the regs say should be here, but the applicant hasn't submitted. Or it states that it will be submitted at a later date, whatever. And then the chair asks the board,
Whether we're gonna accept it as complete,
yeah,
or we
Well,
just give them a
well,
waiver at this
treat
point.
it, treat it like a regular motion.
Right.
Any discussion on the application.
Yeah.
If you just ask the board, like you do any other motion, any questions or concerns, or any discussion on the application being complete. And then the board gets a chance, because they were asked, to speak up and say, well, what about this, this, and this? And then we have our votes.
Okay, Kurt, does that discussion involve the quality of the application?
No.
No.
Just what the regs state supposed to be submitted. Like if someone submits a plat and it's just a hand-drawn thing, and the regs clearly state this needs to be stamped, it needs to have the measurement, the little
Legend.
legend on it, the bar, the measurement bar, and it's just missing because the guy did it himself. But it's a plat that he wants to submit. I mean, Rod can say, this is what he's submitting. It doesn't meet our standards. Do you want to accept it?
Right.
Well, you're kind of,
Well, that is quality then.
Well, but it's,
well, that's okay.
Well, we have the,
but it's a tech.
right, at that
it's-
point, we have the right to waive it.
Right.
We
well,
make the decision whether or not we're gonna waive that,
If it's good enough.
if it's good
yeah,
enough for
Or it could
us.
just simply be
Right.
some piece of information that
Right,
typically is presented on day one. And the
Right.
applicant saying, well, I'll get it to you later. And
right,
then and then the next meeting, it's, oh, I'm still working on it.
Yeah.
And then we're in the position of, well, do we just deny this outright? Or do
because
we,
we've met this, because it's 60 days now.
right,
we
right,
have
and
to
the
make a
applicant doesn't
decision.
want to give a waiver or
Right.
grant the extension.
Right,
So we're put in that position.
Yeah.
Which is never, not good for anybody. So it's just a matter, it's just a procedural thing, just treat it like a regular motion. And I just did up a little like, because I like to just read down the list as I'm going through things, because I tend to forget. But, I can resend this.
Yeah, would you?
that one there also you're gonna give to the public, right?
Right, well, that was the other thing too, yeah.
Right,
The first part of it was how the meeting starts.
right.
So, yeah, because people
Yeah,
from the
so people
public,
can be prepared.
right, especially if
right.
we get a real application in here and the room starts filling up.
Right,
And these people have never been to a planning board before.
Right.
Have no idea, when we say the application's complete, they're going like, you just approved
you
it?
just approved it.
That's what most people would think.
Yeah.
It's like, no, that's not,
Yeah.
sorry, it's not how it works, but yeah,
Right,
it's confusing.
Mhm.
And then when do I get to ask a question? Sitting in the chair there, when do I get to ask a question?
I've got, a thing on, I've only been through one site plan review. I think, maybe two. Never been through a subdivision review. But I think we should require ourselves to, in the site plan review regulations, there's this Article 5, standards and requirements. And it's 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, and so forth. I think we should follow that order of review of any site plan.
What page are you on?
17 in the,
it's not the procedures,
Oh.
it's in our big book.
site plan regulations, page 17. And probably we should just list them out in sort of a check sheet so that, we make sure we hit every one of these items, and some might not apply, which we'll just skip to the next one, but,
I think David actually does that when he does the site review, but to your point, would make it so we can follow along.
I do try to do that. My procedure when we're doing a site plan review or subdivision for that matter, is to go through the regs and kind of make a decision as to which things apply to the particular
Yeah.
thing that we're dealing with. And then I usually try to follow that, in order, just going down the list. I can't say I've done it 100% of the time, but I'd probably give myself at least an 85 plus.
you do a good job, David.
On Lebanon's, website and their planning, in their regs somewhere, I've seen a couple of times, I looked at it. I think it's in the application form, on the Lebanon's zoning application form for site plan or subdivision. They have a little Excel spreadsheet with little check boxes. And they require a lot of very similar stuff that we require. And it's just spelled all out, and you just go down the list, checking off submitted, to be submitted, and then, or to be submitted type of thing, or not required. it's nice because it's all right there on one page.
How did that work with the gravel pit application?
Nothing was submitted. It was a lot
But
of.
it was all checked,
It
it was all checked.
Well, yeah, I mean, if it's a matter of what they're willing to, you know, the applicants say, this is what I'm submitted, say,
Right.
you know, I want my hearing. Then it comes us to say, sorry,
Not complete.
right, this doesn't meet our standards, we're not moving forward. But that's a board decision. That's the other thing,
Yeah.
whereas a chair, you ask the board any comments on this application? And that's when the board gets to speak up and say, yeah, I have a lot of problems with this application.
Anything else that we want to do? On
Somehow
the,
we've got to get all this written down and.
Mr. Secretary,
Oh.
I am
keeping track of everything
I
we
am
said so far.
tasking you with assembling and integrating all of these suggestions that we've talked about tonight and presenting us with a document to review at our next work session.
You've got the Word doc, right?
They're in the minutes.
Ed?
Page 5.
Say, Rob may be able to help you. I know in Claremont, we had one of those forms. And it probably had all the same stuff on
Yeah, I
it.
mean,
And it was actually, part of it was filled out by the applicant, but part of it was filled out by the planner when they came in. And then there was a spot right on there for the land use person to say that they recommend this application complete or not complete.
Mhm.
And that
Yeah.
went to you guys. And the boxes that you were talking about, I believe was checked off by the land use department, not the applicant.
Yeah.
Of what was included and not included.
yeah, but it's, what I liked, it was, everything was on one page, where our regs is like you're flipping pages and this line here, this line down here, it's all over the place, as far as what is required.
So what I'm saying is I think I can get them to send us the Word
Yeah.
document that we can forward on.
Yeah, I mean, it's, yeah, most of the stuff is very similar for every town.
Yeah.
This is what we require, at least to get started.
So we can help just so you don't have to type everything.
Oh,
from
no,
scratch.
not me.
They're out there.
Okay. Tim, you got your marching orders?
Yeah.
Never volunteer for anything?
Whitney's got everything.
Fuck Whitney, she's got it.
She's written everything now.
He's not here, you're gonna have to sit here and do this. And better than that, if Dave and, I just did a blank. I should have been more patient with my mother.
The old guy.
If they're both not here,
You get to run it.
then you're the next in line to run the meeting.
You better hope they're always. Of course, you
Well,
won't be
it
informed,
happened-
so probably.
It
couldn't do that.
happened once, they
Happened
were
once.
both here.
Okay.
Happened once.
Oh, did it really?
We were late. We had another meeting.
No, I was coming back from.
Oh, that's right.
From, I don't remember where I was.
Away,
Yeah.
away.
But I remember I tried to join
Online.
online while driving in my car,
No.
and that didn't work very well.
You need black phone.
Just a minute, officer, I have to vote here.
That was a disaster, to say the least.
Yeah.
I know where I was, I think I was coming back from Ohio that time. Anyhow, I think we,
Make a
Sealy,
motion.
okay,
One thing, are you aware that, that the Heritage got the $700,000 grant that they applied for?
Yes.
That
We got a
goes
grant?
along the scenic byway?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
that was all over television and the Valley News and everything.
oh, okay.
And that originated in the Heritage.
Yeah.
And you all saw the new, Atlas
Mhm.
zoning.
Mhm.
Did
Yes.
anybody study that?
The
enough?
interactive thing
Yes.
didn't work.
I was looking.
Didn't me either, but did anyone study it enough to see if they have an accurate portrayal of infield?
I did not.
I didn't zoom in on
Yeah.
that. Looking at the big picture, I could sort of see, it was, one that they highlighted. But that was just looking at the whole town, statewide map. I was struggling through that, but I meant to mention when he was here, on the park, I don't know if you any folks on NPR, program called podcast called Fresh Air. They actually have, some guy just recently wrote a book on parking, national park, nationwide. And I guess he was interviewed on Fresh Air. I haven't listened to it yet, but he talks about parking lots and.
That was yesterday, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just I'm always a few days behind on listening to this stuff, but it's on the NPR Fresh Air.
Okay. My clock says it's 8:30.
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
Motion made and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Staying? We are adjourned at 8:30. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.